By 1928, Aussie of the Mounted, Pete was finally being depicted in a larger stature with a more bulbous stomach and was drawn in a pair of large overalls, which would also become iconic of the character's design. Pete's final appearance in the Disney Oswald series came in 1928 Hungry Hobo. During this same year, the Disney Oswald series came to an end when Universal Pictures, who owned the rights to the Oswald character in cartoons, assembled along with most of Walt Disney's animators away from him. Universal would keep the series in production for almost another 10 years under the direction of Walter Lantz. In response, Disney started up yet another short series focusing on a troublemaking little mouse named Mickey. For Mickey's second produced short, The Galloping Gaucho, Walt called for the introduction of a villain and thus introduced a newly stylized version of Pete. The new Pete now appeared much larger in height and size, and though he had no peg leg, he sported those iconic overalls and hats. Pete also transitioned from being a bear to a cat, and as a result gained a more cat-like face with whiskers and scruffy ears as well as a long tail. Pete would consequently appear in Steamboat Willie, the third produced yet first released Mickey cartoon, in much the same design. While Pete remained nameless in these early shorts and went under the name Terrible Tom in early comic strips, the character is undoubtedly the same from the original Alice and Oswald, albeit with some cosmetic changes. In 1929's The Barn Dance, he would gain long white gloves before being transitioned into short white gloves in Barnyard Battle. In 1930's The Cactus Kid, he would once again take on the name Peg Leg Pete, well, technically in this short, Peg Leg Pedro, and would finally be reunited with his peg leg. This would also be the first time Pete is seen wearing shoes. Here, Pete would once again be depicted as an outlaw villain against hero Mickey. Conversely, in Pete's following appearance in 1930's The Chain Gang, the roles are reversed. Mickey is depicted as a prison inmate, while Pete is depicted as a ruthless prison warden, as he takes on the opposite role of Mickey. Regardless whether criminal or authority figure, Pete is always seen as the bad guy of the film. One obscure detail that I think is interesting to note is that while Walt continued to legally use the character of Peg Leg Pete, Universal continued to legally use him too, as he would feature in occasional Lance Oswald cartoons right up until 1937, and even strangely transitioning into a rabbit at one point. This would make Pete practically one of the only cartoon characters to ever be utilized by two separate studios simultaneously, and is a great example of just how murky copyright laws were at the time. By 1932, Mickey Short, the Klondike Kid, Pete was once again featured in his outlaw persona and underwent a slight redesign, as artist Norm Ferguson, a chartered character artist, worked on refining his facial structure in an effort to award the character more personality. To do so, Ferguson used actor Wallace Beery as his inspiration. In this short, Pete took on the persona of Pierre the Trapper. Between 1932 and 1934, Pete's design remained practically the same, though he would often be featured in different costumes depending on his role in any given short. By this stage, Pete had started to more closely resemble the big bad that we all know and love. No his protruding face and whiskers, and overall more lively and emotive appearance. In 1932's The Mad Dog, Pete would speak his first words provided by Walt Disney himself. Though voice actor Billy Bletcher would take over voicing duties on the character from 1934's Shanghai, introducing his classic large, booming voice. Get below you, Bob! In that same year's The Dog Napper, he would not only go up against Mickey Mouse, but also Donald Duck for the first time. 1935's Mickey's Service Station would see Pete go up against Mickey, Donald, and Goofy in the trio's first classic team-up cartoon, as Pete takes on the role of an obnoxious, disgruntled customer. It's interesting to note that in this short, as well as in a couple of others, Pete speaks with a somewhat foreign accent, despite still being voiced by Billy Bletcher. I'll be back in 10 minutes. This short would mark Pete's final appearance in black and white. In Moving Day, Pete would appear in colour for the very first time, and would also be given a slight redesign, utilising artist Fred Moore's newly introduced squash and stretch techniques, which allowed characters the ability to move more freely and realistically, as if they had a real weight and could fly by the rules of gravity. While body shapes of other characters changed from rounded to pear-shaped to properly employ these techniques, Pete, the large oaf, remained teeth again as the evil landlord of the House of Mouse, who often sabotages Mickey and his friends' efforts to run a show. Pete would then appear in 2004's Mickey, Donald, Goofy, the Three Musketeers, taking on the persona of Captain Pete. After 67 years, Pete finally gets his peg leg back in one of his most villainous roles of all time. And almost 80 years after his debut appearance, just as all good Disney villains, finally gets his own villain song, Petey's King of France. In 2006 series Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, Pete would appear in CGI animation for the very first time. Here he would be depicted much the same as in Goof Troop, with his evil streak nowhere to be seen. Obviously, as the series is aimed at younger viewers, Pete's depiction in Clubhouse sees him as more of a pest, annoying Mickey and his pals more so than trying to scheme and plot against them. In 2013's Get a Horse, an homage to classic Mickey cartoons, Pete would once again appear as the villain in his most classic 1930s-40s peg-leg Pete design, as he antagonizes Mickey and Minnie. As the show transitions from traditional animation to CG at the end, we get our first look at Pete's classic design in CG animation in a film. Most recently, however, Pete has appeared multiple times in the 2013 Mickey Mouse series by Paul Rudish, which sees him again return to his classic look, albeit in a more stylized form. Here he appears more cat-like than ever, with an unmistakable feline design, and he often wears his classic iconic overalls, hat and gloves, and of course has his peg leg. Outside of the cartoons, Pete's villainous nature has also been capitalized on in more recent years as the main antagonist and villain of the epic Mickey and Kingdom Hearts games, where he appears in a more traditional appearance, albeit in more fantastical costumes. With his current iterations, Pete hasn't quite come full circle, but at least he, as Disney's oldest recurring character and longest serving villain, remains in the spotlight. And with that, it's over to you.